So after all this talk about expenses, let's finally take a look at revenue. Because I know from experience, from my own experience, through training others, through consults, it's the revenue potential that really drives people towards microgreens, especially if you look at it from the point of view in the agricultural mindset of revenue per unit area of space. You know, we often look at the value of a crop in terms of bed feet or row feet or square feet. And so the same thing happens with microgreens is, you know, what is our return per square foot or in essence per square inch because we're working on such small scales relatively. So let's take a look at just a couple things to make sure you're very, very clear if this realm of having a business for yourself is new to you. Just a couple things that you need to be very clear about. So your revenue is contingent on how much you sell. So the more you sell, the more revenue you generate. So the revenue is just your money coming in. Now your profit is contingent on how low you can keep your costs, because your profit is your revenue minus your expenses. And so I can tell you that a tray is worth $25, and you can say 100 trays is $2,500, but you obviously need to pay to produce those trays. And the leftover from that is what is going to be your profit. Now, it is not uncommon for a small business to not be profitable for 3 to 5 years. So keep this in mind. However, the business being profitable is one thing. People getting paid to do the work is another. And we'll take a look at this in more detail in the crop planner. But when we're looking at these models, I'm also thinking about you paying yourself for doing the work, not just doing a bunch of sales and keeping the profits afterwards. So the model is set up so you are paying yourself as essentially an employee of your microgreens business, and the profit that is realized is profit for the business. Now you have a choice then whether to take that profit personally as an employee and owner, or to reinvest that profit back into the business to buy more infrastructure, do more marketing, anything like that. And so generally it's going to be a combination of those things. The idea behind making more profit is that we make more money and we have a higher standard of living. So our basic revenue model for microgreens is the number of trays sold times the average value per tray, and this is going to be our revenue. And so I say average value per tray because the value of a tray is going to change based on what crop it is and the price you sell the microgreens within that tray for. So let's take a look at a few examples here to get a sense of what that looks like. So let's start with a sunflower example, and let's say we're going to sell this sunflower at the farmer's market. So we're going to say that our yield per tray is about 650 grams. We're charging $18 per 450 grams, which is about a pound. And so that makes the value of the tray at the farmer's market about $26 per tray. So at $26 a tray, if we were to sell 50 trays a week, we're generating about $1,300 a week in revenue. Now you need to keep in mind with this, you need to produce that tray. So you have your variable costs we talked about, including your labor. You've got your labor at the market, and if you're doing, say, 2 markets a week, that might be sort of, anywhere from 8 to 15 hours, depending how long the market is. And then you're going to pay fees to be at the market as well. So those are expenses that come off of this revenue to determine your profit. So this is kind of appealing because I think you look at that value and go, at that price, I think I can do fairly good business. But the questions you ask yourself here are, am I going to get that yield per every tray every week? And thus, am I going to get $26 per tray based on that yield? The other thing is am I going to get $18 for every pound I sell? One thing that happens at farmers markets is end up doing a lot of haggling. And then the last thing is, can I sell 50 trays worth of this product a week at the farmers market? So when you're setting these numbers, they have to be realistic. And 50 trays a week is going to be, 50, 60, close to 70 pounds. And so is that something that you can sell at the market? So your expectations and your projections need to be realistic. Now, chances are you're not just going to sell all your product at one market. You're going to sell them to several different markets like we talked about, restaurants, grocers, wholesale, things like that. So if we look at wholesale, we're going to use that same yield, but our price is going to go down. And our price goes down because that wholesaler needs to bump the price up so they can make some money as well. And so our value per tray shifts from $26 a tray to $17 per tray. And so if we were to sell 50 trays worth of sunflower a week to a wholesaler, our weekly revenue shifts from $1,300 a week to $865 a week. And so I think a lot of people would see this and go like, oh, well, why would I make $865 when I could do $1,300? Well, the reality is, so your production costs and your labor costs for harvest are going to be pretty much the same here. But you're not going to pay somebody to be at the farmer's market, which can be a significant expense, and you're not going to pay fees to be at the farmer's market. And really, realistically, you're going to drop these off and walk away. There's no stress. There's no dealing with happy or unhappy customers at the market. There's no standing out in the rain. And so your net return on this may be fairly similar to if you were selling at the farmer's market, but you're putting in much less work. So there's a real reluctance to sell things at a lower price, but if you're putting in much less effort, in many situations, that might make it more appealing, depending on who you are, what your market options look like, and how much repeat business you can get with each of these markets. So let's shift over a little bit from sunflower and take a look at radish. So same thing, we're going to look at it from a wholesale perspective, but we've got a lower yield per tray. And let's say for whatever reason we are going to sell this at the same price, and so our tray value goes from $17.50 or so down to $12 a tray. Whereas with sunflower, we were up at $26 a tray at the farmer's market. And so same thing here. We're seeing the revenue go down significantly here with radish to being only $600 a week if we can move that number of trays. Now, this speaks to two things. One of the questions is, does the labor that goes into radish equal the labor that goes into sunflower? Well, interestingly, harvesting radish is much, much quicker, so there's less of a labor cost there. But it also speaks to the idea of pricing. And how do you price each of your individual products to make sure you're getting the return you want? And with this model, you would look at radish and go, we may need to price our radish higher than we price our sunflower on a price per unit weight basis. So these are a way of breaking things down in a very reductionist way, which I generally do not do to get a sense of where value comes from and where value goes. Now, in reality, each of your trays is going to go to multiple markets. You're going to sell to a farmer's market, some restaurants, and some grocers. And this is why earlier I said we're looking at the number of trays you sell times the average value per tray. And you want to have that average value per tray being as high as you can. And in order to do that, you want to maximize your yield in those trays as well. So it becomes a little complicated to understand in many ways, how you best make money. You may be reluctant to sell things wholesale, but if you have a wholesale market that will take a high volume for very little effort, that might make much more sense for your system and your location. So this is something we'll look at in more detail in the crop planner, because that's one of the things it does. It's looking at your different markets, the price and the volume there. And what it does, it just basically looks at a season and goes, if we sell like this at this price and this volume, what does the model look like? And it takes into account all your production costs and your labor costs and stuff like that. So when we take our business costs into consideration, I kind of leave the infrastructure costs out because they are kind of separate. So when we think about our business costs, our variable costs, our cost of operation, we start to see that our profit in a microgreens business is going to come with scale. And if you're doing $100 in sales a week, you're only doing $5,200 in sales a year. And if you're, doing things by the book and you've got a website and you've got insurance, well, there's 20% of your profit gone, or your revenue gone to expenses. And so if you look at all the other costs that come into that, you're not going to make, as a business, you're not going to make money. You're not going to make profit on $100 a week. Well, what about $500 a week, or $1,000 a week, or $2,000 a week? So where's that point where your business costs are staying the same, but your revenue is increasing quite a bit? And what I've found in looking at my own experience, what other people doing, and then using the crop planner as a model, is you need to be aiming for sales of around $100,000 a year. And this, to some people, might be like, whoa, like that's a lot of money. But this is not your salary, okay? This is your revenue, okay? And remember, this represents how much you are selling. And then you need to think about all the expenses that are going to go into that. And at $100,000 a year, you're kind of almost, depending on a lot of factors, what you can sell at, what your, rental expenses are, all that stuff. This is about a break-even point. Now, break even means it's break even for the business. You have been paid for working for the business. And I usually set my wages in the $18 to $25 an hour range for sort of an operator. And then some wages like lower for support if you've got somebody that's washing trays or doing things like that. So these things are accounted for in there. And at around $100,000 is like, okay, I can work X number of days or X number of hours a week, make a decent wage, and run a business at this. Now, as your sales increase from here is where we really start to see more returns because, if you're harvesting, say, 50 trays of sunflower at a time, bumping that up to 60 doesn't add 20% more cost in terms of your production. You've already got your harvest set up. You've already got your delivery routes going. So this is the point at which you starting to see a much better return. Of course, as scale comes up, there's always other complications, but we won't get into that. It's not black and white. So I would say if you're looking at running a small-scale microgreens business, look at it around $100,000 a year. Now, if you're incorporating it into existing production on a farm and you're using it intermittently for a CSA, then the model is much different. So we're looking at this as a standalone microgreens business, and this is where I would say to aim for. And $2,000 in sales a week is not actually a huge amount. You'll find you can do that fairly quickly. So keep this in mind as you're moving forward. There is more material to be covered still in this workshop, but at this point, we've really covered, the inputs, the regulations, the hygiene components, the production process, infrastructure, so much. And so at this point, I hope you get a very good sense of, one, whether growing microgreens is going to be the right business for you, and two, what it's going to look like in your situation. And the reason I draw from my experience a lot to give you examples, but there are so many unknowns based on where you are, what your market is. There's so many factors that I really try to focus on these different principles so you can decide what the best method is for any of these things that is going to work for you and for your system. So I hope that's been good. There is more material to follow, but hopefully at this point you've got a very good sense of what to do and where to go, and that I hear more from you as your business grows.